I met Austin Crim last semester. He is a sophomore in English 219, which is honors literature. And what we were attempting to do in that course was take a look at non-European literature through history and culture. Austin is not shy, and we had a number of very, very lively discussions. And what he is presenting today is something that I thought was just a fascinating paper where he took a traditionally faith-based text, which was part of our study, and incorporated the parameters I just mentioned of history and culture. So it is indeed my pleasure to present Austin Crim.
Thank you, Dr. Whitten, and thank you all for hearing me this afternoon. Let's dive into my paper entitled Finding Hope. Culture plays a great hand in shaping the life of a people. There are many aspects of a society that form the overall culture. Perhaps the greatest of these aspects is its religion. Religion determines how people view and interact with the world in which they live. This is certainly true for the Jewish people during the time of the first century of the Common Era. The Jewish religion affected all aspects of a Jew's life, especially their literature. The Gospel of Matthew is one of 4 Gospels in the Christian Bible that recounts the story of Jesus Christ. This Gospel is unique in the sense that it is directed at and written with a strong sense of the Jewish religion. By the time this account is written, the Jews are arguably losing hope in the God of their faith. However, Matthew is written as a response to the pagan influences which seem to be draining hope in the God of Israel. The Jewish culture thrives around its religion. This religion is centered on what today is known as the Hebrew Bible. According to this collection of texts, the God of the Jews promises the people prosperity as long as they are obedient to his commands. Nevertheless, this tradition also claims that God will deliver the Jews over as captives to the nations if they are not obedient to him. Many times in the Hebrew Bible, people rebel against God. Therefore, God punishes them. The Jews lose their kingdom to several world powers such as the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and by the time of the historical Jesus of Nazareth, the Roman Empire. However, the Jews are still holding on to a glimpse of light found in Isaiah, one of the books of the Hebrew Bible. This portion of the ancient text foretells a servant who would come and save the people. Under oppression on the verge of losing their heritage, the Jews' plight appears to be fading. Where is this servant that the Scripture promises? Has the God of the Jews permanently abandoned them to be slaves to adversity? In the midst of these dark times, Matthew is written to proclaim Jesus Christ as the promised servant who would deliver the people from the hands of the world and renew God's favor. It is apparent from the allusions made in Matthew that the writer has the book of Isaiah in mind in writing this account of the life of Christ. One example of how the Jewish religion tradition helped shape Matthew is found in this Gospel's depiction of Christ's reaction leading up to the crucifixion. Isaiah prophesies that the servant was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Here, Isaiah foretells that this servant would suffer, but even in the midst of this suffering, the servant would remain silent. Comparing this piece to the description of Christ found in Matthew, one sees a strong similarity. Matthew recounts how Jesus is brought before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and is accused by the Jewish religious leaders. Despite these accusations, the writer of Matthew says that Jesus made no answer to a single word, so that the governor was greatly amazed. This quote shows Christ is silent, even as he is being accused and beaten. Just as the servant depicted in Isaiah is afflicted yet mute, so is Christ in Matthew's account beaten yet still. Obviously, the writer of this gospel has Isaiah's prophecy in mind. Another good example of the impact of Jewish religious tradition on Matthew's gospel is portrayed in Christ's burial. In Matthew's account, Christ dies on the cross and is buried by a rich man of Arimathea, Joseph by name, who took the body and wrapped it in clean linen and laid it in his new tomb. These seemingly minuscule details become significant when connected to the prophecy found in Isaiah. The Hebrew Bible foretells that the promised servant would make his grave with a rich man in his death. One cannot help but wonder why the writer of Matthew includes these specific details pertaining to Jesus' burial. The most probable explanation is that Matthew is characterizing Jesus as the suffering servant. If Matthew can show Christ to be this servant, the hope of the Jews can be restored. Tiny details in Matthew's Gospel, such as the one describing Christ's burial, show that the writer is appealing to Jewish religion. Clearly, Matthew's author is under the influence of Isaiah's predictions. Perhaps the greatest evidence for Isaiah's influence on Matthew is found within the events that occur as Christ dies. According to Matthew, Christ yields his spirit to God while hanging on the cross and then dies. In the very next sentence, the scripture says, "And behold, the veil was split in two from top to bottom." If one is to fully grasp why Matthew includes this detail right after Christ dies, one must first consider some of the pillars of the Jewish religion. Within the Jewish culture at the time of Christ, religion is at the center. At the center of the Jewish religion is the temple of God. Every year, the Jewish high priest sacrifices a lamb and enters the section of God's temple known as the most holy place. According to Jewish tradition, the most holy place is where the very presence of God exists. This section of the temple is so holy that the high priest can only enter it once a year after he consecrates himself. The high priest then offers the blood of the sacrificial lamb to God in order to make atonement for the sins of the people. In doing so, the priest makes peace between God and the Jewish people. However, there's a physical barrier separating the most holy place from the rest of the temple, the veil. This piece of cloth symbolically separates the presence of God from the people. All these facts about the Jewish religion come to culmination when viewing the prophecies of Isaiah and the accounts in Matthew. One great piece of text that illustrates this connection is found in Isaiah 53, verses 4 through 6. "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." In accord with the rest of Jewish tradition, here Isaiah compares the suffering servant with the sacrificial lamb being offered to reconcile the Jews to their God. Matthew takes Isaiah's idea of a man being sacrificed for the sake of the people and applies it to Jesus. One can observe this connection of ideas and the immediacy of Matthew's script. "And behold, the veil of the temple was split in two from top to bottom." Directly after he writes Jesus' death, Matthew includes this detail. Why does Matthew do this? The writer does this to show that Christ is the promised suffering servant who restores the people to God's presence. The veil separates the people from God, just as the pagan influences of the Roman Empire separating them from God. Matthew's scribing of this detail is an attempt to bring peace to the Jewish people, because if the presence of God is now with the people, they have hope. Matthew beautifully takes the tradition of Isaiah's servant and applies it to the person of Jesus. Culture shapes how people function within themselves and with the outside world. Culture has many faces, and perhaps the greatest of these are a culture's religion. For the Jewish people, this rings true. Everything the Jews do, whether it be what they eat, what they celebrate, or who they worship, is ultimately regulated by their religious tradition. Needless to say, the Jews' religion is of the utmost importance to them. For the Jews alive during the time of the historical Jesus, their battle to keep their faith seems to be losing to pagan influences. The Jews seem to wonder if their God has forsaken them, as the Jews' rebellion against their God made him turn away in disgust. In this darkest hour, the writer of Matthew scribes his account of the life of Christ in an effort to restore hope. As observed from several instances in the account, Matthew is able to replenish this hope because he is strongly influenced by the Jewish tradition found in the book of Isaiah. Matthew takes the tradition found in Isaiah and latches it onto the Jesus of Nazareth, forming his gospel to show the Jews that God has not left them. The Jewish people can now take comfort and rest because according to Matthew, they are now in God's presence. Regardless of what culture or religion for that matter one comes from, a person is always searching, longing for one thing: hope. Every culture is shaped by its quest for hope, and the Gospel of Matthew is a shining example of this pursuit fulfilled.